The stagecoach lurched to a stop, kicking up a cloud of dust that shimmered like gold in the late afternoon sun. Eleanor Vance, all 6 feet of her, stepped down her boots, sinking into the soft earth of Willow Creek, a fledgling town nestled in the shadow of Montana's jagged peaks. She clutched a single leather satchel, her heart pounding, with a mix of hope and dread. This is it, she thought, a new beginning. But the stares from the townsfolk, sharp, curious, judgmental, told her this wouldn't be easy. Eleanor had come to Willow Creek for a promise, a marriage arranged through letters to a man named Thomas Harrow. For months, his words had been her lifeline, each inked page a whisper of possibility. She'd left behind a life in Boston where her height made her a spectacle, a woman too tall to be loved, or so the whisper said. But Thomas's letters spoke of respect, of a partnership built on shared dreams. She dared to believe him. Now, standing in the dusty street, she felt the weight of those dreams teetering. The townsfolk gathered their murmurs, a low hum like bees before a storm. Eleanor straightened her chin high, though her stomach twisted. She scanned the crowd for Thomas, picturing the kind-eyed farmer he described himself as. Instead, a wiry man with a pinched face pushed through Amos Reed, the town's postmaster, and as it turned out, Thomas's cousin. His eyes raked over her, lingering on her height, her plain dress, the auburn braid that fell past her waist. His lips curled into something between a sneer and a grimace. "You're Eleanor Amos?" asked his voice, sharp as a blade. Thomas didn't mention, "Well, you're not what we expected." The words stung, but Eleanor had heard worse. "I'm here for Thomas Harrow," she said, her voice steady despite the heat rising in her cheeks. "Where is he?" Amos hesitated, then gestured toward a saloon across the street. "He's inside. But I'll warn you, miss, he's not one for surprises." Her heart sank, but she nodded, gripping her satchel tighter. The saloon's batwing doors creaked as she entered, the air thick with the scent of whiskey and tobacco. There he was, Thomas Harrow, leaning against the bar, his broad shoulders hunched, a glass in hand. He was handsome in a rugged way, with dark hair and a jaw shadowed with stubble. But when he turned and saw her, his eyes widened, then narrowed. The room went quiet. "You're Eleanor?" he asked, his tone flat, almost disbelieving. "I am," she said, stepping closer, her height making her feel like a giant in the low-ceilinged room. "I've come a long way, Thomas." He set his glass down, his gaze flickering over her. "You didn't say you were so tall." The words cut deeper than Amos's sneer. Eleanor felt the familiar ache, the one that came from being seen as wrong her whole life. But she refused to shrink. "You didn't say it mattered," she replied, her voice soft but firm. Thomas rubbed his neck, avoiding her eyes. I thought you'd be different." "I can't. I'm sorry, but this won't work." The rejection was a punch to her chest, stealing her breath. She'd crossed a continent for this man, poured her hopes into his letters, and now he stood there dismissing her without a second thought. The saloon's patrons watched their silence louder than any jeer. Eleanor wanted to run to hide, but she'd promised herself she'd never cower again. "Then I'll find my own way," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. She turned, her boots echoing on the wooden floor as she walked out, the weight of their stares pressing against her back. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the mountains in hues of crimson and gold. Eleanor stood in the street alone, her dreams crumbling like the dust beneath her feet. But as the wind carried the scent of pine and wildflowers, something stirred within her. A spark of defiance, a refusal to let this moment define her. Willow Creek was her new start, with or without Thomas Harrow. She spotted a small boarding house at the edge of town, its sign reading Doña Rufina's. A woman stood on the porch, her gray hair braided, her eyes kind but sharp. Eleanor took a deep breath and started toward it, her satchel swinging at her side. This was not the end, it was the beginning. The boarding house door creaked open, and the scent of sage and fresh-baked cornbread enveloped Eleanor like a warm embrace. She stood in the threshold, her silhouette framed by the fading twilight, feeling as though the weight of Willow Creek's stairs still clung to her. What now, she wondered, her heart bruised but unyielding. She'd come to this town for a husband, but Thomas Harrow's rejection had left her with nothing but her own resolve and a flicker of something fiercer, something that refused to let her break. Doña Rufina. The woman from the porch looked up from a wooden table where she was kneading dough. Her eyes, sharp as a hawk's, softened as they met Eleanor's. You look like you've carried a storm all the way here, child, she said, her voice rich with a faint Spanish accent. Come in, sit. Eleanor hesitated, then stepped inside her boots, scuffing the worn floorboards. The room was small but alive with warmth. Lanterns cast a golden glow, and dried herbs hung from the rafters, their earthy scent mingling with the fire's smoke. She set her satchel down her shoulders, aching from the journey and the weight of the day. I'm Eleanor Vance, she said, her voice quieter than she intended. I need a place to stay. Doña Rufina wiped her hands on her apron, studying Eleanor with a gaze that seemed to see through her. I know who you are. Word travels fast in Willow Creek. Thomas Harrow's bride, or so they thought. She raised an eyebrow, inviting Eleanor to share more. Eleanor's cheeks burned, but she held her head high. He changed his mind, said I wasn't what he expected. The words tasted bitter, but saying them aloud felt like reclaiming a piece of herself. Rufina snorted a sound both indignant and amused. Men like Thomas expect a mirror, not a woman. You're better off without him, Mija. Too tall, too short, too anything, they'll always find a reason to turn away if they're not man enough to see what's real. Eleanor managed a small smile, the first since stepping off the stagecoach. She sat at the table, her hands clasped tightly. I don't know what to do now. I spent everything to get here. I thought... Her voice cracked and she looked away out the window where the mountains loomed like silent sentinels. Rufina slid a plate of cornbread toward her, the edges golden and crisp. Eat. Then we talk. No one plans a life on an empty stomach. As Eleanor took a bite, the warmth of the bread steadied her. Rufina sat across from her. Her hands folded, her presence solid as the oak table between them. Willow Creek's a hard place, Rufina began. Folks here cling to what they know, land tradition, their own kind. But it's also a place where you can carve out something new if you've got the grit. Eleanor swallowed her throat tight. I'm not sure I belong here. They looked at me like I was wrong. Rufina leaned forward, her eyes fierce. You're not wrong, Eleanor. You're different. That's your strength, not your shame. This town needs shaking up, and I reckon you're just the woman to do it. The words landed like a spark in dry grass, igniting something in Eleanor's chest. She thought of Boston, of the whispers that had followed her, of the way she'd learned to walk taller despite them. Maybe Willow Creek wasn't Boston. Maybe it could be more. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Rufina opened it to reveal a man, tall, though not as tall as Eleanor, with broad shoulders and a face weathered by sun and time. His eyes, a deep hazel, held a quiet intensity. Evening, Rufina, he said, his voice low and steady. Heard you had a new guest. Thought I'd bring some firewood. He set a bundle of logs by the hearth, then glanced at Eleanor, his gaze lingering, not with judgment, but curiosity. This is Caleb Wright, Rufina said, a knowing smile tugging at her lips. He owns the land north of town. Keeps to himself mostly, but he's got a good heart. Eleanor nodded, unsure what to say. Caleb tipped his hat, a small gesture that felt oddly respectful. Welcome to Willow Creek, Miss Vance, he said, then turned to leave, his boots echoing softly as he disappeared into the night. Rufina chuckled. That one's got his own scars, but he sees more than most. You'll find your place here, Eleanor. Start with tomorrow. There's work to be done, and I could use a hand. As Eleanor lay in the narrow bed that night, the scent of pine drifting through the open window, she felt a stirring of possibility. Thomas's rejection was a wound, but it wasn't the end. Willow Creek was hers to conquer, one step at a time. The morning sun spilled over Willow Creek like honey, gilding the dewy grass and casting long shadows from the pines. Eleanor stood outside Doña Rufina's boarding house, her breath visible in the crisp air, her hands gripping a broom as if it were a shield. One day at a time, she told herself, but the town's eyes were already on her, their whispers sharp as thorns. She'd come to build a life, but could she withstand a place that seemed determined to reject her? Rufina had given her a task: sweep the porch, tend the garden, and help prepare meals for the boarders. It was honest work, and Eleanor was grateful for the chance to earn her keep. But as she swept, the townsfolk passed by, their glances lingering on her height, her plain dress, the way she stood unapologetically tall. A woman in a bonnet whispered to her companion, "That's the one." Thomas turned away. "Too tall for any man here, I reckon." Eleanor's grip tightened on the broom, her knuckles whitening. She wanted to shout, to demand why her height mattered more than her heart, but she kept sweeping, each stroke a quiet act of defiance. Rufina appeared at the door, wiping flour from her hands. "Don't mind them, Mija," she said, her voice a low, steady anchor. "They're scared of anything that doesn't fit their little world. Keep your chin up and they'll learn." Eleanor nodded, but the words felt hollow against the sting of rejection. She thought of Thomas's cold dismissal in the saloon, the way his eyes had judged her without truly seeing her. She'd come to Willow Creek for a marriage, but now she wondered if she'd been chasing a mirage. Still, Rufina's faith in her sparked a flicker of resolve. She'd prove she belonged not to Thomas, but to herself. As she moved to the garden, kneeling to pull weeds from the rich, loamy soil, a shadow fell across her. She looked up to find Caleb Wright, the man from last night, standing at the gate. He carried a sack of grain slung over his shoulder, his flannel shirt rolled up to reveal strong forearms dusted with earth. His hazel eyes met hers, steady and unguarded, and for a moment she forgot the town stares. "Morning, Miss Vance," he said, setting the sack down. "Rufina said you might need supplies. Brought some grain for the kitchen." Eleanor stood brushing dirt from her hands, aware of how she towered over him. Most men shrank from her height, but Caleb didn't flinch. "Thank you," she said, her voice cautious. "You didn't have to." He shrugged, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Rufina's family to me. Anyone she takes in is too." His words were simple, but they carried a warmth that caught Eleanor off guard. She studied him, noting the faint scar above his eyebrow, the way his hands moved with quiet confidence. There was a story behind those eyes, one he wasn't ready to tell. Before she could respond, a woman's voice cut through the air, sharp and syrupy. Caleb Wright, always playing the hero. Eleanor turned to see a petite woman with golden curls and a dress that screamed, wealth, lace-trimmed, impractical for Willow Creek's dust. Her blue eyes flicked to Eleanor, narrowing with a mix of curiosity and disdain. "And this must be the new girl everyone's talking about." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Lydia, this is Eleanor Vance. Eleanor Lydia Carver. She runs the general store with her father." Lydia's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Charmed, I'm sure. I heard about your situation with Thomas." Such a pity. Her tone dripped with false sympathy, and Eleanor felt the familiar ache of being measured and found wanting. "I'll manage, Eleanor," said, her voice steady despite the heat rising in her chest. Lydia's gaze lingered, as if waiting for her to crumble, but Eleanor held her ground, her hands clenched around the garden trowel. Caleb stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Lydia, don't you have a store to run?" It wasn't a question, and Lydia's smile faltered. She muttered something about errands and sauntered off, leaving a cloud of lavender perfume in her wake. Eleanor exhaled, her shoulders relaxing. "She doesn't like me," she said, half to herself. Caleb chuckled, low and warm. "Lydia doesn't like anyone who doesn't bow to her. You're not here to please her, though. You're here for you." His words lingered as he tipped his hat and left his figure fading into the morning mist. Eleanor knelt back in the garden, the soil cool against her fingers. She didn't know Caleb's story, but his quiet support felt like a lifeline. Maybe Willow Creek wasn't all thorns. Maybe there was room for her to grow. As the sun climbed higher, painting the mountains in shades of amber, Eleanor felt a spark of determination. She'd face the whispers, the stares, the Lydias of this town. She'd make her place one weed at a time. The river sang a restless song, its waters glinting like shattered glass under the midday sun. Eleanor knelt by its banks, her hands deep in the cool, silty earth, planting seeds in the small plot Doña Rufina had entrusted to her. Each seed was a promise, a tiny act of faith in a town that still saw her as an outsider. If I can make something grow here, she thought, maybe I can grow too. But the weight of Willow Creek's eyes, curious, skeptical, sometimes cruel, pressed against her like a storm cloud. Rufina had given her more than a room and work. She'd given her purpose. The boarding house's garden needed tending, and Eleanor threw herself into it, her long fingers coaxing life from the stubborn soil. She'd always loved growing things back in Boston. Her small window box of herbs had been her refuge from the city's judgment. Here, with the mountains watching and the river's hum in her ears, she felt a flicker of that old peace. But peace was fragile, and Willow Creek was not Boston. As she worked, a group of children scampered by, their laughter bright until they spotted her. "Look at the giant lady," one boy shouted, his voice half awe, half mockery. The others giggled, darting away before Eleanor could respond. She froze, the familiar sting of shame creeping up her neck. But then she straightened, brushing dirt from her hands. Let them stare, she told herself. I'm not here to hide. Rufina appeared carrying a basket of laundry, her sharp eyes catching the scene. Kids are like crows, she said, setting the basket down. Noisy but harmless. Give 'em time, mija. They'll come around. Eleanor nodded, but doubt gnawed at her. It's not just the children. The whole town talks. They think I'm wrong. Rufina's lips pursed. Wrong's just another word for different. You keep planting those seeds, and you'll show 'em what grows from strength. She handed Eleanor a small packet of sunflower seeds. These'll grow taller than you. Plant 'em by the fence. Let the town see beauty doesn't bow to their rules. Eleanor smiled, tucking the seeds into her apron. As she worked, the rhythm of digging and planting steadied her. The river's song wove through her thoughts, and for a moment she felt rooted, as if the earth itself was claiming her. But then a shadow fell across the plot, and she looked up to find Thomas Harrow standing there, his hat in hand, his face a mix of guilt and hesitation. Miss Vance, he said, his voice low. I owe you an apology. Eleanor stood wiping her hands on her apron, her heart pounding. She'd replayed his rejection 100 times, each memory a bruise. What for? She asked, her tone guarded but curious. Thomas shifted his eyes on the ground. I wasn't fair to you. In the saloon, I let my surprise get the better of me. I shouldn't have judged you like that. His words were a balm, but they didn't erase the hurt. Eleanor studied him, noting the lines of weariness around his eyes, the way his shoulders sagged. He wasn't cruel, just weak, and that was its own kind of disappointment. You made your choice, Thomas, she said. I'm making mine now. I'm staying whether you want me or not. He flinched but nodded. I hope you find what you're looking for here. He hesitated, then added, if you need anything, I'm not far. As he walked away, Eleanor felt a strange relief. His apology didn't change the past, but it freed her to look forward. She turned back to the garden, planting the sunflower seeds with deliberate care, each one a defiance of the town's expectations. Later that afternoon, Caleb Wright appeared, leading a horse laden with tools. Rufina said, You're fixing up the garden, he called, his voice carrying over the river's murmur. Thought you might need a shovel or two. Eleanor smiled, grateful for his quiet kindness. You're making a habit of showing up with help, she said, taking the shovel he offered. Their hands brushed, and she felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the sun. Caleb grinned, a rare flash of lightness in his weathered face. Habit's not a bad word when it's for a good cause. He nodded toward the seeds. Sunflowers, huh? They'll make this place look alive. As they worked side by side, the river's song seemed to soften, blending with the rustle of leaves and the scent of damp earth. Eleanor felt something shift, a sense of belonging, fragile but growing like the seeds beneath her hands. Willow Creek might not love her yet, but she'd make it see her. The air carried the sharp tang of pine and the faint sweetness of blooming wildflowers. But Eleanor's heart raced with a different kind of scent, fear laced with possibility. She stood in the garden, her hands stained with earth, watching the first green shoots of her sunflowers pierce the soil. They're growing, she thought, a quiet triumph swelling in her chest. But as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across Willow Creek, she couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was waiting to uproot her fragile progress. The past week had been a blur of work and small victories. Eleanor's days at Doña Rufina's boarding house were filled with purpose, tending the garden, helping with meals, and learning the rhythms of the town. Rufina's sharp wit and warm encouragement had become her anchor, and Caleb Wright's quiet visits, bringing tools, seeds, or just a few words of support, had started to feel like a rhythm of their own. But the town's whispers hadn't stopped. Every glance, every hushed conversation reminded her she was still an outsider, too tall, too bold, too different. That afternoon, as she hauled water from the river for the garden, a familiar figure approached Lydia Carver, her golden curls gleaming under a wide-brimmed hat. Eleanor braced herself, her grip tightening on the bucket. Lydia's visits were never accidental, and the glint in her blue eyes promised trouble. Hard at work, I see, Lydia said, her voice honeyed, but sharp like a blade dipped in sugar. It's admirable, really, how you've settled in after everything. Eleanor set the bucket down, meeting Lydia's gaze. I'm making a place here, she said evenly. Work suits me. Lydia's smile tightened. Of course. But you must know Eleanor Willow Creek doesn't take kindly to strangers who stir things up, especially ones who catch certain eyes. Her gaze flicked toward the path where Caleb had been earlier repairing a fence for Rufina. Eleanor's stomach twisted. She'd sensed Lydia's interest in Caleb, the way her eyes lingered on him, the possessive edge in her voice. "I'm not here to take anything that's yours," Eleanor said, her voice steady, despite the heat rising in her cheeks. "I'm here for me." Lydia laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, you're not a threat, dear. Caleb's got his own ghosts to wrestle with. But don't think you can waltz into this town and change things. Some of us have roots here, deep ones." Before Eleanor could respond, Lydia turned and glided away, her skirts swishing like a warning. The words stung, but they also sparked a fire in Eleanor. She wasn't here to compete with Lydia or anyone else. She was here to build something real, something hers. That evening, as the boarding house filled with the savory aroma of Rufina's stew, Caleb stopped by with a bundle of wildflowers, purple lupines and yellow daisies, their petals vibrant against the dusk. "For the table," he said, handing them to Eleanor with a shy smile. "Thought they'd brighten the place." She took them, her fingers brushing his, and felt a warmth that lingered longer than it should have. "They're beautiful," she said, her voice soft. "Thank you, Caleb." He shrugged, but his eyes held hers, steady and searching. "You're doing good work here, Eleanor. Don't let the likes of Lydia make you doubt it." She wanted to ask what he meant, to probe the quiet pain she glimpsed in his gaze, but Rufina called them to dinner. As they sat around the table, the boarders, a mix of minors, a school teacher, and a quiet widow, chatted easily, their laughter a balm to Eleanor's nerves. Caleb joined them, his presence grounding, and for the first time Eleanor felt a flicker of belonging. But as the meal ended, Rufina pulled her aside, her face serious. "Be careful, mija. Lydia's not just talk. She's got her claws in this town, and she doesn't like sharing. Caleb's got a past with her, a broken engagement years back. It left him scarred and her bitter." Eleanor's heart sank. Caleb's kindness, his quiet strength, was it just friendship or something more? And could she trust her own heart in a town that seemed determined to keep her at arm's length? As she arranged the wildflowers in a jar, their colors glowing in the lantern light, she felt the weight of Lydia's warning and Rufina's words. But she also felt the earth beneath her feet, the roots she was planting, and the stubborn hope that refused to fade. The lantern's glow flickered like a heartbeat, casting shadows that danced across the boarding house walls as night settled over Willow Creek. Eleanor sat by the open window, the cool breeze carrying the scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke. Her fingers traced the petals of Caleb's wildflowers, their vibrant colors a quiet rebellion against the day's tensions. Can I trust him, she wondered, Lydia's warning and Rufina's revelation swirling in her mind. In a town quick to judge, trust felt like a seed planted in rocky soil, fragile but worth tending. The past few days had been a delicate balance. Eleanor's garden was thriving, the sunflower shoots, now ankle-high, their green tips a testament to her persistence. The townsfolk still whispered, but a few had softened. A miner tipped his hat, a shopkeeper offered a smile. Rufina's boarding house had become her sanctuary, its creaky floors and warm meals, a reminder that she wasn't entirely alone. Yet Lydia's presence loomed, her influence woven into the town's fabric like thorns in a rose bush. That morning, Rufina had announced a town dance to celebrate the harvest, a tradition that drew even the most reclusive to Willow Creek's barn. "You're going," Rufina declared, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Folks need to see you, Eleanor. Not just your height, but your heart." Eleanor had protested, dreading the stares, but Rufina's fierce gaze won out. Now, as she slipped into a simple blue dress borrowed from Rufina's trunk, tailored to fit her long frame, she felt exposed, her confidence wavering. The mirror reflected a woman she barely recognized, tall, yes, but with eyes that burned with determination. She pinned a lupine to her collar, a small nod to Caleb's kindness, and stepped into the night. The barn glowed from within its doors, flung wide, spilling light and music into the crisp air. Fiddles sang and laughter mingled with the clink of glasses. Eleanor hesitated at the threshold, her heart pounding. The crowd was a sea of faces, some curious, some indifferent, a few openly hostile. Lydia stood near the center, radiant in a crimson dress, her laughter drawing eyes like moths to a flame. Thomas was there too, lingering by the punch table, his gaze flickering toward Eleanor before dropping away. She took a deep breath, the scent of hay and cider grounding her, and stepped inside. Whispers followed, but she kept her chin high, her steps deliberate. Rufina appeared at her side, looping an arm through hers. "You're a sight, mija. Let 'em stare." Before Eleanor could respond, Caleb approached, his flannel shirt swapped for a clean vest, his hair tamed, but still curling at the edges. His hazel eyes softened as they met hers. "Miss Vance," he said, offering a small bow. "Care to dance?" The question caught her off guard, her pulse quickening. She glanced at the dance floor where couples twirled, then back at Caleb, who stood a head shorter, but undaunted. "I'm not much of a dancer," she admitted, her voice low. "And I stand out." His smile was warm, unyielding. "Good. You should." He extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it, her fingers enveloping his. The crowd parted as they moved to the floor, and Eleanor felt every eye on her. But Caleb's grip was steady, his steps sure, and as the fiddle's tune swept them into a waltz, the world narrowed to the warmth of his hand, the rhythm of their movement. "You're braver than you know," he murmured, his voice barely audible over the music. "Coming here, staying, planting that garden, it's more than most would do." Eleanor's throat tightened. "I don't feel brave. I feel watched." "Let 'em watch," he said, his eyes locking with hers. "They'll see a woman who doesn't bend." The dance ended, but Caleb didn't let go immediately, his hand lingering in hers. Across the room, Lydia's smile faltered, her eyes narrowing. Eleanor felt a chill, sensing the weight of Lydia's resentment. As Caleb led her off the floor, Thomas approached, his expression conflicted. "Eleanor, you look nice tonight," he stammered, then glanced at Caleb, retreating without another word. The moment left Eleanor unsteady, caught between Caleb's warmth and Thomas's regret. She stepped outside the cool night air, a relief against her flushed skin. The stars glittered above, and the river's distant song called to her. She wasn't sure where she stood with Caleb, with the town, with herself, but she knew one thing: she wasn't running. The stars hung low over Willow Creek, their light sharp and unyielding, as if daring Eleanor to claim her place beneath them. She stood outside the barn, the music and laughter fading behind her, the cool night air brushing her skin like a whisper of courage. Her dance with Caleb still lingered, his steady hand, his quiet words, the way he'd looked at her, not as too tall, but as enough. Yet Lydia's piercing gaze and Thomas's faltering words had stirred a storm in her chest, one that churned with doubt and defiance. "Am I enough?" she wondered, her fingers brushing the lupine pinned to her collar. "Or will this town always see me as a stranger?" She wandered toward the river, its gentle rush a counterpoint to her racing thoughts. The dance had been a step forward, a moment of belonging, but it had also drawn lines in the sand. Lydia's resentment, Thomas's regret, and Caleb's unexpected warmth. Eleanor knelt by the water, the damp earth cool against her knees, and let the river's song steady her. She wasn't here to win a man or a town. She was here to build a life, and she'd fight for it. Footsteps crunched behind her, and she turned to find Caleb, his silhouette framed by the barn's distant glow. "Thought you might need some air," he said, his voice low, carrying the same quiet strength she'd felt in his hand during the dance. He stopped a few feet away, giving her space, his hands tucked into his pockets. "I did," Eleanor admitted, standing to face him. The moonlight caught the scar above his eyebrow, a reminder of the past Rufina had hinted at. "It's a lot being here, feeling like I'm on display." Caleb nodded, his gaze steady. "I know that feeling. Folks in Willow Creek love their boxes, put you in one, and they think they've got you figured out. But you don't fit their boxes, Eleanor. That's why they stare." She laughed softly, a sound tinged with bitterness. "They stare because I'm a head taller than anyone else. Because Thomas sent for a bride and got me." Caleb stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. "Thomas was a fool. He saw what he wanted to see, not what's real. You're not just tall, Eleanor. You're strong, stubborn kind. You're planting a garden in a town that's half dust. That's more than most of us manage." His words warmed her, but they also stirred questions. "Why are you so kind to me, Caleb?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't know me, not really." He looked away toward the river, his jaw tightening. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he spoke, his voice rough with memory. I know what it's like to be judged for something you can't change. Years ago, I lost someone. My fiancée, Clara. Not Lydia before her. Clara was sick and I couldn't save her. Folks said I was cursed that I brought bad luck. Lydia was thereafter, but she wanted a man she could control, not one carrying ghosts. I learned to keep to myself, but you, he paused, meeting her eyes. You remind me there's still good worth fighting for. Eleanor's breath caught. His honesty was a gift, raw and unguarded, and it made her feel seen in a way she hadn't expected. I'm sorry, she said softly. About Clara, and about this town's cruelty. He shrugged a small, weary gesture. It's past. But you, Eleanor, you're not. You're here, and you're fighting. That's why I'm kind. Because you deserve it. Before she could respond, a sharp voice cut through the night. Well, isn't this cozy? Lydia stood at the river's edge, her crimson dress a stark contrast to the moonlight. Her smile was a blade, her eyes flicking between Eleanor and Caleb. I didn't realize you were so quick to move on, Caleb. Or that you'd choose her. Eleanor stiffened, but Caleb's voice was calm, edged with steel. Go home, Lydia. This isn't your business. Lydia's laugh was cold. Oh, but it is. This town talks, Caleb. And they'll talk about you dancing with the giantess, whispering by the river. You think you can rewrite your story with her? She's nothing here. Eleanor's fist clenched, her heart pounding with a mix of anger and resolve. She stepped forward, towering over Lydia. I'm not nothing, she said, her voice steady. I'm Eleanor Vance, and I'm staying. Say what you want, but you don't own this town or him. Lydia's eyes widened, but she recovered quickly, turning on her heel with a huff. As her footsteps faded, Eleanor felt a surge of strength like a seed breaking through stone. Caleb's gaze met hers, a quiet pride in his eyes, and she knew something had shifted, not just in her, but between them. The dawn broke over Willow Creek with a blaze of pink and gold, as if the sky itself were cheering Eleanor's defiance. She stood in the garden, the morning dew soaking her boots, her hands cradling a sunflower shoot that had grown taller overnight. You're not nothing, she'd told Lydia last night, and the words still echoed, a fire kindled in her chest. But as the town stirred awake, its whispers sharper after her confrontation by the river, she wondered if her boldness had built a bridge or burned one. The dance had shifted something in Willow Creek. Some townsfolk nodded to her now, their curiosity softening into cautious respect. Others, swayed by Lydia's influence, cast sidelong glances, their murmurs laced with scorn. Eleanor felt the weight of both, but she refused to bend. She'd faced rejection before, Thomas's cold dismissal, Boston's cruel stares, and she'd survived. This town would not break her. Rufina was in the kitchen, her hands deftly shaping dough for the day's bread, when Eleanor shared what happened by the river. You stood up to Lydia Carver, Rufina said, her eyes gleaming with pride. That's no small thing, mija. She's used to ruling this town like a queen. But you're a force she didn't expect. Eleanor smiled, faintly stirring a pot of porridge. I didn't plan to make enemies. I just couldn't let her words stand. Rufina nodded, her expression serious. You've got fire, Eleanor, but fire draws attention. Lydia won't let this go, and she's got allies, folks who owe her father favors. Watch your back. The warning lingered as Eleanor headed to the market to sell some of Rufina's preserves. The town square buzzed with activity vendors hawking apples, a blacksmith's hammer, ringing children darting through the crowd. Eleanor set up her stall, her jars of peach and berry preserves glinting in the sunlight. She stood tall, her auburn braid catching the breeze, determined to prove her worth through work. A few customers approached, drawn by the preserves' rich colors. A schoolteacher bought a jar, complimenting Eleanor's neat labels. A miner lingered, asking about her garden, his gruff voice softening as she spoke of sunflowers and soil. For a moment she felt the town's pulse shift toward acceptance. But then Lydia appeared, her crimson shawl a stark contrast to the market's earthy tones, her smile sharp as a blade. Charity work is it, Lydia said loudly, drawing eyes. Selling preserves to scrape by? How quaint. The crowd hushed and Eleanor's cheeks burned, but she held Lydia's gaze. It's honest work, Eleanor said, her voice clear. Something you might not understand, Lydia. A ripple of gas spread through the crowd. Lydia's eyes narrowed, but before she could retort, Caleb's voice cut through. Enough, Lydia. He stepped from the crowd, his hat tipped back, his hazel eyes steady. Eleanor's earning her place here. What are you doing besides stirring trouble? The market fell silent, all eyes on the standoff. Lydia's smile faltered, but she recovered, tossing her curls. I'm protecting this town, Caleb, from outsiders who don't belong. She turned to the crowd, her voice rising. You all saw her at the dance flaunting herself, trying to steal what's ours. Eleanor's heart pounded, but she stepped forward, her height commanding attention. I'm not stealing anything, she said, her voice ringing out. I came to Willow Creek to build a life, not to take from it. My garden grows food for this town. My work helps Rufina feed you. Judge me for my height, my past, whatever you want, but judge me for what I do not, what you fear. A murmur ran through the crowd, some nodding, others uncertain. Caleb's lips twitched into a proud smile, and even the schoolteacher clapped softly. Lydia's face reddened, but she had no reply. She stormed off, leaving a wake of whispers. As the market resumed, Caleb stayed, helping Eleanor pack the remaining jars. You handled that like a storm breaking, he said, his voice warm. They're starting to see you, Eleanor. The real you. She met his eyes, her heart fluttering at the sincerity there. I hope so, she said softly, but I'm not sure I can keep fighting like this. You don't have to fight alone, he said, his hand brushing hers as he handed her a jar. The touch lingered, a quiet promise, and Eleanor felt the fire in her chest flare brighter. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for a place, for trust, for something that felt dangerously like love. The wind howled through Willow Creek, rattling the boarding house windows and carrying the scent of rain-soaked pine. Eleanor stood in the garden, her hands trembling as she clutched a broken sunflower stalk, its vibrant head snapped by the storm that had swept through the night before. Not you too, she thought, her chest tight with a grief that felt bigger than a single plant. The garden was her proof, her defiance against a town that saw her as too much, too tall, too different. Now, with the storm's wreckage scattered around her, she felt the weight of every whispered judgment, every sidelong glance threatening to crush her resolve. The market standoff with Lydia had rippled through Willow Creek like a stone dropped in the river. Some townsfolk had warmed to Eleanor, her preserves sold out, and a few women even asked for gardening tips. But others loyal to Lydia's influence doubled their scorn. Notes had appeared at the boarding house, crude words scrawled on scraps of paper calling her giantess or worse. Rufina burned them in the fire, her face fierce, but Eleanor saw the worry in her eyes. The town was splitting, and Eleanor was the fault line. She knelt to salvage what she could, the muddy earth staining her dress. The sunflowers were battered but not lost. Their roots held firm. Like me, she thought, though the comparison felt fragile. She'd faced Lydia, stood up to the crowd, but each victory came at a cost. Doubt gnawed at her. Could she truly belong here, or was she fighting a losing battle? Footsteps squelched in the mud, and she looked up to see Caleb, his coat damp from the morning's drizzle, a shovel slung over his shoulder. Heard the storm hit hard, he said, his hazel eyes scanning the garden's damage. Thought you might need a hand. Eleanor managed a tired smile, grateful for his presence. It's a mess, she said, gesturing to the broken stalks. But I can't give up on it, not now. Caleb set the shovel down and knelt beside her, his hands gentle as he helped clear debris. You don't give up, do you? He said, his voice soft but laced with admiration. Most folks would have left by now. I thought about it, she admitted, her voice low. After Thomas, after Lydia, sometimes I wonder if I'm foolish to stay. Caleb paused, his eyes meeting hers, steady and unguarded. You're not foolish, Eleanor. You're brave. This town's hard, but it's changing because of you. I see it the way folks talk about your garden, your work. You're planting more than sunflowers here. His words warmed her, but before she could respond, a shout rang out from the boarding house. Rufina stood on the porch, her face pale, waving them over. Eleanor, Caleb, come quick. They hurried inside, the air thick with the scent of charred wood. In the kitchen, a small fire smoldered in a corner, the remnants of a rag soaked in oil. Rufina stamped out the last embers, her hands shaking. Someone set this, she said, her voice tight with fury. Found it just in time. If I hadn't been up... Eleanor's stomach dropped. Lydia, she whispered the name, tasting like ash. Rufina shook her head. No proof, but I'd bet my last dollar. She's got friends who do her dirty work. Caleb's jaw clenched, his fists balling at his sides. This stops now, he said, his voice low and dangerous. I'm going to the sheriff. Lydia's gone too far. Eleanor grabbed his arm, her heart racing. Caleb, wait. If you accuse her without proof, it'll turn the town against us. Against me. He hesitated, his eyes searching hers. I won't let her hurt you, Eleanor. Not like this. The sincerity in his voice, the fierce protectiveness, made her breath catch. She saw the man behind the scar, the one who'd lost love and carried guilt, but still chose to stand by her. I know, she said softly, but we need to be smart. I'll face her, but on my terms. Rufina nodded, her eyes fierce. You've got us, Mija. We'll rebuild the garden, fix this place. But you need to show this town you're not scared. As the rain began to fall again, Eleanor felt a resolve harden within her. The fire, the broken sunflowers, Lydia's cruelty, they were tests, but she was stronger than them all. She looked at Caleb, his presence a steady anchor, and knew she wasn't fighting alone. Tomorrow she'd confront Lydia not with anger, but with the truth of who she was, a woman who wouldn't break. The sun rose over Willow Creek, its rays piercing the morning mist like a promise kept. Eleanor stood in the town square, her heart pounding, but her chin high, the scent of fresh earth and blooming sunflowers clinging to her dress. Today was the Harvest Festival, a celebration of the town's bounty, and Eleanor had chosen this moment to face Lydia, to claim her place, to show Willow Creek she was more than the giantess they'd whispered about. I am enough, she thought, her hands steady despite the crowd gathering around her. But would the town see her, or would Lydia's shadow snuff out her light? The square was alive with color, tables laden with apples, pumpkins and jars of honey, children laughing as they chased ribbons, fiddles humming a joyful tune. Eleanor's garden had borne fruit, her sunflowers towering over the stalls, their golden heads a beacon of her resilience. She'd spent the morning with Rufina and Caleb setting up a table of preserves and vegetables, each one a testament to her work. But the fire in the boarding house, the broken stalks, and Lydia's venomous campaign weighed heavy. Today, Eleanor would end it. As she arranged her jars, Lydia appeared, her crimson dress a stark contrast to the earthy tones around her. The crowd hushed, sensing the tension. Still playing farmer, Eleanor, Lydia said, her voice loud enough to carry. This town doesn't need your charity crops. Eleanor took a deep breath, the scent of sunflowers grounding her. She stepped forward, her height commanding the square. These crops aren't charity, she said, her voice clear and strong. They're for Willow Creek, for the boarding house, the school, the families here. I came to build a life, not to take from yours. If you can't see that, Lydia, it's your loss, not mine. The crowd murmured, some nodding, others shifting uncomfortably. Lydia's smile faltered, but she pressed on. You think you belong here? You're a stranger, too tall, too bold for this town. Even Thomas didn't want you. The jab stung, but Eleanor didn't flinch. Thomas made his choice, and I've made mine. I'm staying, I'm building, and I'm not alone. She glanced at Caleb, who stood nearby, his hazel eyes fierce with pride, and Rufina, her arms crossed, a warrior's grin on her face. Caleb stepped forward, his voice steady. Eleanor's done more for this town in weeks than some do in years. Her garden feeds us. Her courage challenges us. If you can't see that, Lydia, you're the one who doesn't belong. A gasp rippled through the crowd. The schoolteacher clapped, and the miner from the market joined in. Slowly, others followed their applause, a tentative tide. Lydia's face reddened, her eyes darting to the crowd, but her allies were silent, their loyalty wavering. She turned and fled, her crimson dress a fading ember. Eleanor exhaled, her knees weak, but her heart soaring. The crowd dispersed, some stopping to buy her preserves, others offering shy smiles. Thomas approached, his hat in hand. I was wrong about you, Eleanor, he said quietly. I hope you find happiness here. She nodded, no anger left, only peace. As the festival continued, Caleb found her by the sunflowers, their golden heads swaying in the breeze. You did it, he said, his smile soft but bright. You showed them who you are. We did it, she corrected, meeting his eyes. You stood by me, Caleb. That means more than you know. He took her hand, his touch warm and sure. I see you, Eleanor. Not just your height, but your heart, your strength. I want to build something with you if you'll have me. Her breath caught joy and fear mingling. But as she looked at him, at the town now buzzing with life, at the sunflowers standing tall, she knew her answer. Yes, she whispered, and he pulled her close, their heights no barrier to the warmth between them. Months later, Eleanor and Caleb married in the garden, under a canopy of sunflowers with Rufina beaming, and the town most of it cheering. They built a home on Caleb's land, their love rooted in respect and equality. Eleanor's garden grew, feeding Willow Creek and inspiring others to plant their own. She'd come as an outsider but left a legacy proving that strength and love could bloom anywhere. If you loved Eleanor's journey of resilience and romance, like, share and subscribe to explore more stories of hearts that refuse to break